Hi, everybody. Eve Harrow on the Land of Israel Network, hostess of Rejuvenation. And I'm very excited to have as my guest today Jonathan Neumann, who got up quite early this morning in London in order to be on the show. So good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Eve. Great to be with you.
Okay, so you just put out a book, To Heal the World, which has stirred a lot of pots around the world, and a lot of blogs, and a lot of all kinds of things in the newspapers, and answers to you and answers from you back to others. So your book, tell us about it, a little bit about your background and why you wrote this book, To Heal the World.
Well, I'm a millennial, and I'm concerned about the direction of American Judaism that's been fashioned by an older generation, which essentially seems to see Judaism as little more than a partisan outfit. So the book was born of that concern, and it's about an idea called tikkun olam, a phrase that I think a lot of your listeners may be familiar with. It literally means repair the world, or more poetically, heal the world, hence the title of the book, To Heal the World. And tikkun olam, as your listeners will know, is a Hebrew phrase from the Talmud, from the Kabbalah, from Aleinu, the Jewish prayer, and it's been totally lifted out of context by essentially radical Jewish liberals in the United States to mean social justice. It never meant that before. There isn't really any basis for that interpretation of the idea. And social justice is effectively leftism. Whatever the political issue in the United States, you know, it could be immigration, abortion, taxes, healthcare, whatever it is, whatever the liberal viewpoint, and in some cases radical viewpoint on that issue, that is social justice. And this idea of tikkun olam, or what you might call Jewish social justice, has taken over Judaism in America. Judaism has become a wing of the Democratic Party in America, and there isn't really any basis for this kind of leftist politicization. But it's taken over. You're
saying that a biblical idea, a Torah precept, has become a political means to an end?
Well, yeah, and we use the word Torah in the wider sense of kind of the entire Jewish canon. It doesn't appear anywhere in the Torah, in the Pentateuch. It doesn't even appear anywhere in Tanakh, in the Bible at all, which is quite remarkable for something that has become really the central motif of American Judaism. You know, pretty much every other major idea in Jewish thought appears somewhere in Tanakh, if not in the Torah. And so it's particularly strange that this idea that everyone thinks is a mitzvah, is a commandment, is the most important principle of Judaism, doesn't really appear anywhere. In the central texts.
It appears in rabbinic works and in works that are written about the Tanakh, but not in the Tanakh itself. But what's interesting is that some of the people who are holding up this flag are rejecting a lot of the other ideas of the rabbinic ideas, and have seemed to like just grabbed onto this one as being the be-all and end-all.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And you see the selective reading. You see it in the passages they lift out, in the passages they lift out of context, that they give distorted meaning to. They completely twist and morph the meaning of sections of Tanakh, of important ideas like Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus, and so on. So it's this kind of distortion is the only way to really make all of this make sense, because there isn't really a basis for it legitimately in the Jewish canon, in Torah.
Now, I mean, some of the pushback that you're getting from Shaul Magid and from others, and my listeners can go Google the entire controversy and read it all for themselves, is that you are misinterpreting what they're doing, or you don't know the sources well enough in order to make some of the statements that you're making. So how are you dealing with all of that? I mean, you're getting some pretty heavy hitters, which means that you have bothered people, which is a good thing right there. Because one of the issues that I talk about all the time, and certainly certainly a lot of us talk about, is the fact that there isn't a conversation anymore in the United States. Everybody is just shouting at each other. Nobody's actually listening. So just the fact that I think that you have gone out there with something that, I don't know if you meant it to be provocative, but certainly has provoked reactions, I already think is a good thing, that there's a dialogue at all about this issue. And someone has said, there's this, something's going on here that has to be talked about. So I just want to put that out there. But how are you dealing with some of the really very, very angry reactions that you are getting to this book?
Well, I think this is an idea that means a lot to people, kind of on both sides of the debate. So I think it's natural that people will be provoked by it. And I think that's good. It means people are engaging. And crucially, I'm pleased. And this, I think, is speaking to what you're saying. I'm pleased that people of all political stripes are reading the book, because, that seems all too rare in America today. And really, I encourage people to read the book and decide for themselves whether or not they are predisposed to agree or disagree with its conclusions. I think it's very important that we start to have a debate. I think that's needed in American political discourse more generally, and I think it's also needed within the Jewish world. I think it's time that all sides start really engaging with this.
Mm-hmm. Well, out of curiosity, I mean, you're a Brit. So what got you to focus on American Jewry? And do you not see that your own country is also involved with this? Or you think it's really an American phenomenon?
Well, this is certainly, by and large, an American phenomenon. You get it sort of, kind of trickling down a little here and there into other, particularly Anglo diaspora communities, but for the most part, the extent of its hegemony is really an American phenomenon. And personally, I used to live in the United States, and I care about American Jewry. It's the largest and most influential Jewish community outside of Israel. We should all care what happens in American Judaism. And this phenomenon is not just about American politics in itself, although that's a big enough topic, but it's causing enormous damage, in my view, within the Jewish community in America and to the American Jewish relationship with Israel, to American Jewish Zionism. I think it's having an enormous undermining effect on that relationship, and that's something that we should absolutely all care about.
Mm-hmm. Well, because their criticism of Israel is coming from a place that they think we are not good at social justice or tikkun olam, and therefore we're an embarrassment to them, or we're not representing Judaism the way that they think it should be represented. Is that what you would say about, and that's kind of, there's a lot of criticism coming from the States, but is that what you could say would be somewhat of a generalized idea?
Yeah, but I think it goes a lot deeper than that. Tikkun Olam's issue with Zionism and with Israel goes back to kind of 1960s radicalism, and the kinds of folks who are the sort of radicals who really advanced the idea of Tikkun Olam in America today were anti-American and anti-Israel radicals in the 1960s.
Like Michael Lerner.
Yeah, Michael Lerner, Arthur Waskow, those kind of
Saul Alinsky, who was also hugely involved with former President Obama's ideology, if I'm not mistaken. Very big influence on him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, so these people were kind of anti-American and therefore anti-America's allies like Israel, and pro sort of the Soviet Union and its allies like, at the time, the Arabs. And they felt, a particular connection to the Israel issue, to Israel's alliance with America, because they were Jews and they felt implicated in that and kind of embarrassed by it. And it's kind of out of that milieu, you had organizations like Brera and then New Jewish Agenda in the 70s and the 80s, respectively. And what we see today in Jewish social justice is kind of an outgrowth of that. And fundamentally, Tikkun Olam has an Israel problem. The basic principle from what I can see and from what I've researched is that the more a group, or in many cases even an individual, is connected to the idea of Tikkun Olam and social justice, the more anti-Israel they are likely to be. And, that also shouldn't be a surprise when we look more broadly at social justice today in American discourse. It is not the pro-Israel faction in American political life, right? We don't expect social justice marches to be the place where Israel is supported.
Quite the opposite.
Exactly. And that idea has also permeated the Jewish community. And of course, the Jewish community is also involved as much as it can be, without being sort of expelled from the broader social justice movement. They try to be as involved as they can, but of course we see that they're not welcome in things like the Women's March, which is in bed with anti-Semites like Louis Farrakhan. We see in marches like
Linda Sarsour.
Yeah, exactly. The Chicago Dyke March as well, that Jews aren't allowed to be in that and have flags with the Magen Davids and so on. So the Jews aren't really welcomed in these social justice marches either, because of course, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are essentially part of the same coin. But they try as hard as they can to be, because they still sort of believe in these ideals, but they're having a tough time, I think.
So I just wanted to run something by you that is something somewhat of concern for me, because as a tour guide here in Israel, I guide many Jews of all different affiliations as well as Christians. And one of the things that I hear from the Christians is that they feel that because these are the loud Jews in America, and because this idea of social justice and pro-choice and pro-gay and all of this has been somehow turned into a Jewish issue, like a tikkun olam issue, that they are getting upset with Judaism or with Jews. And they come here to Israel and they see a very different kind of Jew. And I certainly am not representative of Israelis, but they come here and they meet a lot of different Israelis, and they realize that Judaism is not just one way and one way of thinking, but it is very, very, very heterogeneous. And they come away a bit relieved, I think. But my concern is that your average American that does not come to Israel, because most don't, and are not exposed to what I think Judaism really is, which is just a set of a very broad spectrum of ideas and of ways of interpretations of the Torah. I'm worried that this might actually cause a level of even anti-Semitism of Christians to Jews in America, because so many of these values of the Tikkun Olam crowd, as you call it, the social justice crowd, are, first of all, they're against Torah values, many of them, but they're also against many of the things that the Christians, who are still the majority in America, it's a Christian country, that they stand for. And that at some point they could see this as actually being against America. And that these Jews are coming in and trying to change what America stands for. Am I like getting a little bit too hysterical, or is this something that you see the potential of? Because when I listen to you talk, you're talking about the 1960s and 70s. That's saying to me that what's happening now with BDS, etc., we should have seen coming. This should not have come as a shock or a surprise, because the writing was on the wall. So I'm wondering if something might be brewing in the future that's even worse, that right now should be ringing bells among us. What would you say about that? That was a lot of stuff. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
I do some thinking too. Yes.
We might have to go in stages. Okay. So, look, as a basic principle, I'm never into the idea that Jews can in any way cause anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is from the anti-Semite; it's not from the Jew.
Excellent point. Yes.
But that being said, this movement is not. It's not trying to win friends by any means. It is actively going out against, particularly the Christian community, but also more broadly against America, certainly the way that conservatives understand America and American values. And as you say, that goes back again to the 60s and 70s. These are radicals, come out of, Students for a Democratic Society and that sort of thing, the strong anti-Vietnam protests and so on. These are not people who are generally considered to be big fans of America, or at least America the way that it is or is likely to be. So you absolutely have that basis, and they're not going out to win friends. It's not like, we're kind of very pro-America, but it's only with Israel that we have a problem. Their problem with Israel comes from their problem with America.
So some of your, the people who are detractors of your book are saying that you don't properly define traditional Judaism. That you're saying that their idea of tikkun olam is against traditional Judaism. They've kind of developed something, and they've developed almost like a political idea, and then they're smacking Judaism onto it to some degree. So how would you answer that? How do you define traditional Judaism, if that's what you're comparing it to?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't define traditional Judaism in the book. For one thing, if I had defined it, then I would have been condemned for whatever definition I would have employed. So, you
would have gotten detractors from the other side. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. or even from that side as well, they wouldn't have been satisfied. So either way, but I think, look, this is a popular book written for the Jew in the pew, as they say, and 9 out of 10 ordinary Jews in the pew or on the street would give you a similar description of what a traditional Jew is, or at least what it isn't, whether they themselves practice or not. So I'm not overly concerned that people are going to look at this and say, oh, what is he talking about? What is this traditional Judaism? Yeah, we might disagree on the boundaries, one person to the next, but for the most part, people, I think, know what traditional Judaism looks
keeping
like.
Shabbat to a certain degree, keeping Shabbat to a certain degree as a special day, the holidays, as it were, not just sitting down to a Passover Seder, and also perhaps certain laws of kashrut. I think I agree with you. You didn't say it, so I can't agree with you. But I mean, I would throw that out there as being more or less, the ideas that bind us as a community or distinguish us from other people, which is where I'm going with this, because it seems to be that kind of idea of universalism is really at the core of so much of what they're talking about, that they have reinterpreted the specificity of Judaism and of the job that the Jews have to do in the world, which is to bring the Torah to the world for the most part, and not be just like everybody else. Not everybody is like everybody else, but it seems to be fitting into this idea of everybody's just the same. Nobody has a unique role to play in the world. And that is kind of what's bothering me about their lack about their moving away from whatever you want to define traditional Judaism as. Do you see that as part of it? I know you talk about that in your book. The rabbis weren't universalists. They don't talk about, when we're supposed to be helping our community, they're speaking specifically about first the Jewish community and then everybody else. That seems to have gotten trashed in this political bubble that we're talking about right now.
That's exactly right. And this universalism is really at the core of what tikkun olam is about. And what I call the theology of tikkun olam is based on creation. It's based on the creation of the world and the creation of human beings in the image of God, because they want to go back to a place where we are all the same. They want to go back to the shared provenance that all of humankind has, and that's an important teaching in Judaism, but it is not the primary basis of obligation, which is revelation, which is at the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai. So that is what differentiates the Jews, because our obligation is first and foremost to one another, just in the way that we are obligated morally more to our own family and to our parents and to our children, because Judaism, at the end of the day, the Jewish people is a family. We are the biological descendants of Abraham. That is what we are. So they absolutely are trying to get as far away from this as possible. And in that respect, this is a sort of classic assimilationist impulse.
So where does God fit into all of this? Because at least my reading of Judaism is that, of course, it's also how we relate to each other and how we relate to our communities. But there's also supposed to be a God factor in here. We're also supposed to believe that there was a revelation at Sinai and that there is a creator and he gave everybody a specific thing to do in the world. This is what he gave us to do. And where has that gone when it comes to these ideas of theirs?
God is basically an irrelevance, with the exception of the idea that God created all of humankind in his image, which is kind of more of a metaphor than anything else in their minds. That is it. God really doesn't play any role. Incredibly, even in their interpretation of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus from Egypt, which is of course absolutely pivotal to traditional Judaism, God plays no role in in their interpretation, because the idea is that tikkun olam and social justice have to be implemented by man. And once you start introducing God, then that starts to become problematic, because it starts to take it out of the realm of politics, which is where they want all of this to happen. And also, the more you talk about God, the more you talk about Judaism and Jews and the particularistic Jewish people. And they have a big problem with that. They see Jewish peoplehood as chauvinistic, as outdated, as embarrassing, and they want to get as far away from it as possible. But what's interesting is that whereas they are universalist when it comes to the Jews, they are not universalist when it comes to everybody else. You know, they don't go around to African Americans or American Muslims or any other community and say, you need to drop all of your rituals or culture or beliefs, you know, as applicable. You need to drop all of those, because ultimately we're all the same, and stop doing all the stuff that differentiates you from everybody else. They absolutely don't say that, of course, as you know. It's only with the Jews.
Right.
It's only with the Jews. They celebrate difference in everybody else, and what they celebrate in everybody else they find chauvinistic in themselves. It's extraordinary. It's quite pathological, actually.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. I was going to say maybe the next person that I should have on here should be some kind of psychiatrist or something, which there are no shortage of books that have been written about that embarrassment of the Jewish elements that make us specific and unique, but bring it on for everybody else and be very proud of everybody else's ethnicity. The problem is that this isn't a small group. And when the last president of America was very much a proponent of this, and it does serious damage. This is not, I mean, I don't see this as just being some quaint idea. Because they brought it into the political realm, they are really trying to affect policy, and how, especially the United States, which currently is the world's only superpower, we'll see what happens tomorrow, does things around the world. And that's what I find dangerous. So how is that? Was that your concern also when you wrote this, or coming more from a place as someone who's Jewish, who feels that his Judaism has been hijacked, that a label has been put onto a Judaism that isn't Judaism, and that's what's being promoted around the world? Or are you concerned on a larger level?
I'm concerned on both levels, for sure. Tikkun Olam has taken over American Judaism, and it is liberal politics. That is all it is. Their religion is politics. That is the way that they do ritual, that they do worship. It is in politics. It is in campaigning. Mm-hmm. And President Obama was infatuated with this idea of Tikkun Olam. He was nurtured by liberal Jews in Chicago, as we know, and he would often speak in his speeches about the impact of this idea on his life. And it's interesting that the Seder night, the first night of Pesach, is one of the most, if not the most popular kind of quote unquote ritual in the kind of Tikkun Olam sphere, because they compose Haggadahs about any number of political issues, and they talk about any political issue under the sun, except, of course, actually what the Seder night traditionally is and what it means to the Jews and the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. And that was the ritual that Obama introduced to the White House. And I talk about this in the introduction to the book. And for that reason, I think that actually Obama's animus towards Israel, or his hostility towards Israel, he was the most hostile president towards Israel, certainly in a generation, if not in history, is not in spite of his commitment to Tikkun Olam, but because of it. It is part and parcel of it, and that is one of the reasons that the American Jewish community that is infatuated with this idea of Tikkun Olam was so supportive of him. So it is absolutely something that we should all be concerned about. It is obviously about religion and faith and our culture and civilization and faith, which is of the utmost importance. But it is also about politics, and even leaving aside the domestic politics of the United States, so people will have one view or the other, but crucially, the way that it impacts Israel, and it is negative. As we said before, Tikkun Olam has an Israel problem, and we saw that in the Obama White House and with his Jewish supporters.
Well, it would be quite consistent to try and weaken Israel, because Israel is like waving this different flag of Judaism, which, if they've taken over the branding, if you will, of Judaism, is a pain. It was more than a pain. It's saying that perhaps they're wrong, or there's an alternate idea out there, and then it would make perfect sense that Israel doesn't have the right to exist, or Israel shouldn't exist, or certainly the way that we are now, which is becoming to some degree more nationalistic, where Israelis are, and I prefer the word patriotic, and some of the laws that have been passed here in Israel, which are really saying very clearly that this is a Jewish state, yet some of the things that they think we do here are not their version of Judaism. So it actually is quite consistent with what they're touting to not be pro-Israel, quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. So I guess on that sense, it makes sense. Where are you? Are you going on a book tour? Are you speaking about the book, which is just coming out now?
It is. Yeah, exactly. It is. The book has just come out, and we're going to America at the very end of July, beginning of August. We're speaking in New York and Washington, D.C. That's going to be quite a quick tour, and we're hoping to be back maybe on the other side of the summer and further into the year. There's been an enormous amount of interest, which is very gratifying, and it's great that people want to hear about it and want to talk about it and want to read it. So, we're very excited.
Okay. Well, Jonathan Neumann, also I should mention, went to Cambridge, the London School of Economics, knows a thing or two about stringing a word together. I'm encouraging people to read the book, To Heal the World. Agree, disagree, but get thinking about it, and thinking about something that really we've been dealing with now, and I've talked about this repeatedly on the show, and maybe now someone has finally come out and put it in a cogent fashion and is inviting people to debate with him and to argue with him about it, because that at least puts it out there, and they don't have all the shutting us down or shutting down the people who disagree with them is the most dangerous thing of all. And Jonathan Neumann is not letting the issue get shut down. So for that, I very much appreciate the fact that you put this book down, and encourage people to read it, To Heal the World. And if he's coming your way, just go and hear him. Jonathan Neumann. Any last words before we sign off?
Joseph, thank you so much. It's been great to be speaking with you. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. And I know we'll be hearing interesting things in the next few months. And take care of yourself. Okay, everybody, I hope you found that interesting. Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Thanks to Ben and to Tabitha, as usual, for teching and doing all this great work on the show, and everybody else involved with the station. Eve Harrow, take care, everybody. Goodbye for now.
We are faced with a huge challenge here. I'm worried about the rift and the split.
This is Gil Hoffman, host of Inside Israel Today, here on the Land of Israel Network, on thelandofisrael.com. I interviewed the next chairman of the Jewish Agency and current opposition leader of Israel, Isaac Herzog.
But I preferred doing it because of the enormous challenges facing the Jewish people, and my feeling that I have a unique opportunity to leave my mark, and when it comes to the well-being of the Jewish people.
Tune in to Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network, on thelandofisrael.com, to hear this interview and many exciting interviews.